Still remember the day I came home and saw my little girl sitting on the front porch, her tiny backpack beside her, eyes red and swollen from crying. My heart dropped. She ran into my arms the second she saw me, trembling like a leaf caught in the wind. Behind her, all of our belongings were stacked like trash waiting to be picked up. Boxes, clothes, even my daughter's favorite stuffed bunny, dumped outside as if we were strangers. And standing in the doorway with a smug grin was my pregnant sister Eva. Her hand rested on her belly, as if her unborn child gave her divine authority. "Take the hint," she sneered. "No one wants you here. This house is mine now." In that instant, every memory of my parents' favoritism, every time they had brushed aside her cruelty, came flooding back. But nothing could compare to the rage I felt when I realized they had helped her. They had helped pack my things. They had let my daughter sit outside for hours, terrified and alone. I wanted to scream, to fight, to demand justice, but all I could do was hold my little girl tighter, my heart pounding with the realization that we were truly on our own. And that was just the beginning. To understand how we got to that heartbreaking moment, you need to know a little about my family. I'm the older daughter, 33, single mom, and someone who's had to fight for every ounce of stability I have. My younger sister, Eva, she's 29, bigger, louder, and has always had this aura of entitlement wrapped around her like a crown she never earned. Growing up, Eva treated me less like a sibling and more like a rival she was determined to crush. If she shoved me, scratched me, or even pinned me to the floor, my parents would shake their heads and say, "She's just the baby of the family. How could she possibly hurt you?" As if my bruises and tears were just figments of my imagination. It didn't matter that I was older. In their eyes, Eva was fragile, innocent, and deserving of endless protection. Meanwhile, I was expected to be the bigger person, to forgive, to move on, to keep the peace. I learned early on that in my parents' household, justice was a luxury I wasn't entitled to. By the time I became a mother myself, that favoritism had only grown worse. When my cheating husband walked out during my pregnancy, I had no choice but to pick myself up and raise my daughter alone. I begged my mom for help, even just for a few days after giving birth. She looked me in the eye and said, "You have to learn to handle motherhood on your own. That's how women grow stronger." Fast forward a couple of years later, when Eva announced her pregnancy. Suddenly, my mom turned into Florence Nightingale, cooking meals for her, hovering with vitamins, offering to babysit before the baby was even born. The same woman who couldn't spare a single night for me was practically kneeling at Eva's feet. The hypocrisy cut deep, but I tried to ignore it. After all, my father had convinced me to move back in with them after my separation, saying it would save me rent money and give my daughter a safe place to grow up. At least, that's what I thought. But deep down, I had this gnawing feeling that their loyalty wasn't to me or my daughter. It was, and always had been, to Eva. And soon enough, that truth would become impossible to ignore. When Eva showed up at my parents' house, heavily pregnant and radiating her usual smugness, I knew trouble was coming. She didn't even wait for me to ask a polite question about her stay. The moment I said, "So, how long will you be here?" she barked from across the living room, "I'm here to stay." Got a problem with that? That tone, the entitlement dripping from every word, was like being dragged back into childhood. Except now, instead of stealing my toys or tattling to our parents, she was invading my daughter's safe space. I glanced at my mom, hoping she'd at least clarify. Instead, she nervously mumbled something about how Eva's husband got a transfer and that living with our parents would be best for her. My jaw nearly hit the floor. Best for her? She had a husband with a stable job, an apartment ready for her, and yet she was nesting back in our parents' home like a queen expecting servants. And of course, my mom jumped at the chance. She cooked for her, hovered around her with supplements, even fluffed her pillows like Eva was royalty. Watching it all made my stomach twist. Because when I was in the same position, pregnant, scared, abandoned, my mom wouldn't even visit me more than twice. She told me motherhood was supposed to be hard, that I had to learn to manage on my own. But for Eva, suddenly motherhood was a group project. I tried to keep my head down. I reminded myself that I was paying rent, contributing to groceries, covering my own expenses. I had every right to be there, but Eva treated me like a parasite, constantly making digs about how I was mooching off our parents, even though I was literally keeping the mortgage afloat without knowing it. The worst part? My daughter started picking up on the tension. She'd cling to me whenever Eva walked into the room, her little hand tightening around mine. At night, she'd whisper, "Mommy, why does Aunt Eva hate us?" And I had no answer, no gentle lie strong enough to cover the truth. The walls of that house began to feel smaller every day, the air heavier with Eva's presence. And in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was building towards something, that all this posturing was leading to an explosion. And I was right. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I had just gotten back from work, exhausted, my daughter trailing behind me with her rain boots splashing little puddles on the driveway. I expected to walk into the house, drop my bag, and finally breathe. Instead, I froze. All of our belongings, clothes, books, even my daughter's toys, were piled on the front lawn, getting soaked in the rain. My heart stopped as I saw my daughter's stuffed bunny lying face down in the mud. I rushed forward, frantic, thinking maybe it was some kind of mistake. But then I heard laughter. Eva's laughter. From the doorway, she leaned against the frame, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other clutching a mug of tea like this was just another episode of her favorite show. "Oh, look who's home," she smirked. "Guess what? We decided this house is too crowded. Time for you to find your own place." I stared at her, not comprehending. "We?" I asked. My voice was shaking, but not from fear, pure disbelief. That's when I saw my parents step out from behind her. My mom wouldn't even meet my eyes, fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. My dad just sighed, as if this decision was some burden on him. And then he said words I'll never forget. "You're old enough to manage on your own. Eva needs the space more than you do. It's time you moved out." The world spun. My daughter clutched my leg, her little voice trembling. "Mommy, where will we sleep?" I wanted to scream. To throw every sacrifice, every rent payment, every night I stayed up working to keep that roof over us, right back in their faces. But standing there, drenched in rain, holding my child, all I felt was betrayal so deep it hollowed me out. Eva sipped her tea, her grin wide and satisfied. "Don't drag this out. Just take your stuff and go. We don't want drama in front of the baby." That was the moment I realized my family had never truly been mine. They had chosen her, again, always her, and they had tossed me aside like I was nothing. And so, with shaking hands and tears burning in my eyes, I held my daughter close and walked away from the only home I'd ever known. That night, I drove aimlessly with my daughter strapped in the back seat, her head resting against the window. She had cried herself to sleep clutching that muddy stuffed bunny, and I kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror, my chest aching with every little whimper she made in her sleep. We had nowhere to go. No plan, no home. I parked in a grocery store lot at one point, turned off the engine, and just sat there in the dark, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. For the first time in years, I felt like a scared teenager again, the one my parents had abandoned when things got hard. Except now, it wasn't just me. I had a child depending on me, looking to me for safety, for answers, for a future. I thought about swallowing my pride and calling them, begging to let us back in. But then I remembered the look on Eva's face, that triumphant smirk, and the coldness in my father's voice. They had made their choice. Going back wasn't an option. So I wiped my tears, started the car, and drove to the only motel that had a glowing vacancy sign. The room was small. The carpet smelled of mildew, and the sheets were scratchy. But when I tucked my daughter into bed, she looked at me and whispered, "It's okay, Mommy. We're still together." That broke me, completely. I lay beside her, staring at the stained ceiling, and swore to myself that this would not be our forever. I didn't know how yet, but I promised that I would find a way to build us a life so secure, so strong, that no one, not Eva, not my parents, not anyone, would ever be able to take it away from us again. It was in that cheap, run-down motel that something inside me shifted. The hurt was still there, raw and bleeding. But beneath it, I felt a spark, a determination I had never known before. They had thrown me away, but I was going to rise. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the thin motel curtains, and for the first time in hours, I felt clarity instead of panic. My daughter woke up smiling, as if she had already decided, as long as we're together, we're home. I couldn't let her down. So I got up, washed my face in the cracked sink, and opened my laptop on the shaky nightstand. I started searching for apartments, tiny ones, run-down ones, anything I could afford. Most of them seemed impossible, the rent sky high, but I kept scrolling, refusing to let despair win. At the same time, I threw myself into work. I picked up extra shifts, applied for side jobs, and even dusted off old skills I hadn't used in years. Every dollar mattered. Every hour spent away from my daughter was a sacrifice, but I told myself it was temporary, and slowly, things began to shift. I found a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, peeling paint, creaky floors, but it was ours. I remember unlocking the door for the first time, my daughter racing inside, twirling in the empty living room like it was a palace. In that moment, I realized it didn't matter how small it was. What mattered was that no one could take it away from us. We slept on a mattress on the floor at first, with second-hand blankets and borrowed kitchenware. But each day we added something: curtains, a thrifted table, little drawings my daughter taped to the fridge. Piece by piece, the emptiness turned into a home, and with every nail I hammered, every meal I cooked in that tiny kitchen, I felt a strength I had never known. The rejection from my parents still burned, the betrayal still echoed, but beneath it all, a new version of me was being born, one who refused to be disposable, one who would carve out a life on her own terms. Eva had tried to erase me. My parents had chosen her over me, but I was starting to realize maybe that was the gift, because without their cruelty, I might never have discovered just how much I was capable of building on my own. Weeks turned into months, and little by little, the shadows of that night on the lawn began to fade. Life wasn't easy, far from it, but for the first time, it was ours. Every challenge I faced was mine to conquer, every victory mine to savor. I landed a promotion at work, one I had once thought was out of reach. Long nights spent studying, balancing deadlines with bedtime stories, finally paid off. When my boss shook my hand and said, "You've earned this," I felt something inside me heal. For once, recognition came not because of who I was related to, but because of what I had done. With the raise, I upgraded our apartment. Nothing extravagant, just a brighter place with 2 bedrooms where my daughter could finally have a space of her own. I painted the walls soft yellow, watched her pick out posters for her room, and felt pride swell in my chest. It wasn't just about the apartment, though. It was about freedom, about knowing that no one could dangle a roof over our heads and threaten to snatch it away. And then came the moment that surprised me most. At my daughter's school, a teacher pulled me aside and said, "She's thriving, confident, kind. She always talks about how strong her mom is." I nearly cried right there in the hallway, because for so long I had worried that my daughter would be scarred by what we had been through, but instead she was blossoming. Maybe because she saw me refuse to break. Maybe because together we had built something unshakable from nothing. The woman who once drove around aimlessly in the rain with no place to go was gone. In her place stood someone new, resilient, capable, unafraid of starting from zero. Ava and my parents had thrown me away, but without meaning to, they had pushed me into the life I was always meant to build. And for the first time in years, I felt not just like a survivor, but like a victor. It happened when I least expected. I was at the grocery store one Saturday morning, pushing my cart down the aisle, my daughter skipping beside me, humming a tune. Life had finally settled into something steady, something safe. My guard was down. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Is that you?" I froze, turned slowly, and there she was, Eva. She looked different, tired, worn, her once perfect smile now cracked at the edges. But her eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, hadn't changed. And standing a few steps behind her were my parents, my mother clutching her purse like a shield, my father staring at me as if seeing a ghost. For a moment the air felt sucked out of the room. My daughter tugged at my sleeve, whispering, "Mom, who are they?" Eva was the first to step closer, plastering on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You look, well," she said, though her gaze flicked over my clothes, my cart, searching for weaknesses. My mother whispered my name softly, almost as if it hurt to say it. My father stayed silent, his jaw tight. 1,000 emotions surged through me: rage, hurt, betrayal, even a flicker of longing for the family I had once begged for. But standing there, With my daughter's hand in mine, I realized something. I didn't need their approval anymore. I wasn't the broken girl they had thrown out onto the lawn. I wasn't the desperate woman crying in a motel parking lot. I was someone they couldn't destroy. So I smiled, calm and steady, and simply said, "Yes, I'm doing well." And I walked away, leaving them standing in the aisle, stunned. For the first time, the power wasn't in their hands. It was in mine. A week later, the universe seemed to deliver its own brand of justice. I received a call from my father, his voice trembling. We can't keep the house. The bank has finalized the sale. We tried everything." I listened quietly, feeling a mix of disbelief and vindication. The same house that my parents had used to control and manipulate me, the house Ava had used as her playground of dominance, was slipping from their grasp. And then came the news about Ava. Her husband had filed for divorce. The so-called transfer and accommodation story was revealed as lies, and her finances were in chaos. Suddenly, the woman who once chased me out and humiliated my daughter found herself powerless. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The universe had done the work for me. Instead, I focused on what mattered. My daughter. Watching her laugh in our cozy living room, seeing her sleep peacefully in her own bed, and knowing that no one, not Eva, not my parents, could ever threaten our sanctuary again. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years I had been the doormat, the powerless one, but life has a way of balancing scales. I hadn't needed revenge. Life simply delivered the consequences. And it was sweeter than anything I could have planned. I had paid my dues, faced betrayal, rebuilt from nothing, and emerged stronger. The pain had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. I was free, truly free, and the people who had once held power over me were left to face the results of their choices. Looking at my daughter, her little hands clutching mine as we painted our walls with new dreams, I realized the ultimate lesson. We can't control others, but we can control ourselves. And in doing so, we can rise above any cruelty, any injustice, and create a life filled with love, safety, and dignity. Ava's reign was over. My parents had to live with their choices. And I was finally home, sitting in our little living room, watching my daughter build a tower of blocks. I finally allowed myself to breathe. The weight of betrayal, of manipulation, of being cast aside, it was still there, but it no longer defined me. I thought about all the nights I cried alone, all the moments I doubted myself, all the fear that threatened to paralyze me. And yet, here we were, alive, safe, and thriving. Life had tested me, but it had also shown me the depth of my own resilience. Sometimes the people we expect to protect us the most are the ones who fail us. Sometimes the ones who hurt us are those we love. And yet, it's in those moments of abandonment that we discover our true strength. I didn't need anyone's approval anymore. I didn't need my sister to acknowledge her wrongs, nor my parents to validate my pain. What I needed, and what I had earned, was peace, safety for my daughter, a life built on my own terms. Looking back, I can say this: injustice can be devastating, betrayal can cut deep, but perseverance, love, and self-respect can turn even the darkest chapters into stories of triumph. We can't choose who will hurt us, but we can choose how we rise afterward. And in rising, we find not just survival, but freedom, dignity, and joy. As I tuck my daughter into bed each night, I whisper a silent promise. No one will ever take our peace away again. And with that, I know we are truly home.